The human warrior had never thought the stars would feel so close and so strange at the same time. Captain Elias Kane had traveled far beyond Earth, beyond the colonies humanity had built, into regions of the galaxy most people only saw in maps and dreams. He had faced harsh environments, unknown creatures, and complex space politics. But nothing had prepared him for the world he now found himself on, a world not hostile in the usual sense, not violent, not warlike, but alien in every detail and utterly inscrutable to a human mind. He was not free. The beings who had captured him were not ordinary creatures. They were Xiphorians, a race of tall, slender entities whose skin shimmered in faint colors, shifting with the light and perhaps even with mood. Their eyes were luminous, deep pools that seemed to see through a person's body and mind. Elias had been restrained, not roughly, but firmly, and led through a towering hall filled with symbols that seemed alive. The walls were not solid stone or metal but appeared to pulse slightly, like the living tissue of a great organism. Every step he took echoed in the hall, yet the sound was soft, muted, and somehow musical. The Xiphorians did not speak to him in words at first. They communicated in gestures, subtle shifts of posture, and melodies that vibrated through the air. Elias could not understand their language, but he could feel their attention. He was an outsider, and outsiders were rare here. More than that, he was destined to play a role he did not understand fully. When they brought him into the central chamber, his heart sank. At the center stood a raised platform, circular and polished, glowing faintly in the ambient light. Around it were figures in ceremonial robes, moving gracefully, almost floating. The chamber itself seemed alive with an unspoken reverence. Elias realized with a jolt that the platform was an altar. The ritual would begin soon. He didn't know the details, only the signs. He was meant to be part of something sacred, something far beyond the human understanding of sacrifice or honor. He tried to steady himself. Years of training as a soldier, years of discipline, taught him how to stay calm in dangerous situations. This, however, was different. There was no weapon he could draw, no shield he could raise. His body felt both heavy and light at the same time, as if the air itself weighed on him and lifted him in equal measure. Then, a figure approached. Unlike the others, she moved with deliberate gentleness, not the strict, ritualized steps of the priests. She was smaller than the other Xiphorians, yet there was a presence about her that filled the space without effort. Her skin shimmered with a soft golden hue, and her eyes, the most expressive Elias had seen among this species, held curiosity instead of authority. She was the priestess, he realized, and yet she was unlike any he had expected. Her name, as he would later learn, was Lyra. From the moment she looked at him, Elias sensed that she did not see him as a mere participant in a ritual. There was recognition, the faintest hint of understanding. She did not speak, at least not in words humans could understand. Instead, she moved closer and studied him as one might study a rare and beautiful artifact, yet with care and tenderness, not cold detachment. The ceremony began around him, but Elia's attention remained on Lyra. She moved among the other priests, her gestures subtle yet different. At times, she reached out toward him, almost imperceptibly, as though testing the limits of what she could do without breaking the sacred order. He did not understand what she intended, only that she intended something, and that it was different from what the others planned for him. Hours passed in a quiet blur. Elias had no concept of time as he had known it. In the human world, time was marked by clocks, by the rising and setting of the sun, by meals and sleep. Here, the passage of time was measured by the slow unfolding of ritual, by the careful movements of the Xiphorians, and by the subtle changes in light. He felt both patient and restless, aware of the weight of expectation pressing upon him, yet unable to act. Finally, Lyra approached him directly. She did not touch him, nor did she speak, but she held out a small device. Elias could not identify it. It was smooth, oval, and it glowed faintly in the same color as the altar. When he looked into her eyes, he understood something he had not expected. She was offering him a choice. Not a direct one, not in words, but a silent, urgent communication. He could take the device and trust her. He could refuse and remain entirely at the mercy of the ritual. Elias reached out. His fingers brushed the glowing surface and a warmth spread through his hand. The sensation was gentle, not frightening. In that moment, he understood that Lyra's choice was as brave as his own, to challenge the sacred traditions, to question the ways of her people. He could sense her heart racing, even beneath her calm exterior. This was not rebellion in the loud, explosive sense. It was quiet, steady, and full of conviction. With the device in his hand, something changed. The altar pulsed more brightly, but not with menace. The other Xiphorians paused, as if sensing a shift in the balance of the ceremony. Elias did not know what he had done, only that he had taken the first step into a story far larger than himself. Lyra smiled faintly, and the tiniest thread of hope formed in his chest. As they moved away from the center of the chamber, Elias began to observe more closely the Xiphorian culture. Their rituals, while unfamiliar, were not cruel. They valued knowledge, precision, and connection in ways that humans often overlooked. Lyra introduced him to concepts of harmony and balance that resonated with his own experience as a leader and strategist. He realized that he was not merely a participant. He was a bridge, a living example of something new. For the first time since his capture, Elias felt a spark of agency. He could not yet escape, nor could he fully understand the complexities of Xiphorian society. But he could communicate, learn, and perhaps influence. And in Lyra, he had found an ally, a being who saw him not as a sacrifice but as a person. Night, as humans understood it, did not exist on this world, but the ambient light dimmed in gentle waves, and Elias felt a sense of rest settle over him. Lyra led him to a quiet chamber lined with soft, luminous surfaces. He was not restrained here. He could sit, lie down, or move freely. She stood at the edge, watching him with quiet intensity. They spent what felt like hours in silence, yet it was not empty. Elias tried to communicate with gestures, pointing to himself, then to her, then to the world outside the chamber. Lyra responded in kind, creating symbols in the air with graceful motions that he gradually began to understand. Slowly, he realized he could convey ideas and she could convey them back. The first words he ever heard her speak in his language were soft and tentative. "You are not here by mistake," she said, her voice melodic but precise. "I see what others do not." Elia's chest tightened. That simple phrase carried more weight than any human speech he had ever heard. It was recognition, acceptance, and hope rolled into a single statement. The ritual outside the chamber continued, but here, in this small, quiet room, something unprecedented was happening. A human and an alien were communicating as equals, learning from one another, building trust across species, culture, and expectation. He felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. His mind raced with possibilities. If he could understand the Xiphorians, if he could work with Lyra, perhaps the ritual could be changed, not in defiance, not violently, but through understanding, creativity, and courage. The thought ignited a spark he had almost forgotten in the endless struggles humans faced in distant colonies, the spark of possibility, of making a difference where none seemed possible. Outside, the Xiphorians continued their ceremony, unaware of the subtle shift taking place. Within the temple walls, a new chapter had begun, one not defined by tradition, but by curiosity, respect, and daring ideas. And for the first time, Elias Kane allowed himself to imagine a future where he was more than a captive, where he could be a partner, a teacher, and perhaps even a hero in the most unexpected way. As the soft, glowing light enveloped the chamber, Elias looked at Lyra and nodded. She returned the gesture almost imperceptibly, and the unspoken agreement passed between them. They would learn, they would understand, and they would change what had seemed unchangeable. The stars outside continued to shine, distant and indifferent, but inside, a new light had begun to burn, a light born of trust, courage, and the quiet heroism of two beings who dared to see beyond the boundaries of expectation. And so, on a world far from Earth, a human warrior waited not for freedom, but for understanding, ready to step into a story that would reshape both his destiny and that of an entire species. Days passed on the Xiphorian world, yet they did not feel like human days. The light in the sky shifted gently, almost imperceptibly, and time seemed measured by the rhythms of the planet rather than by hours or minutes. Elias Kane had long since stopped counting. He had been captured, brought here, and placed on the altar, but now he was not a prisoner, not in the sense humans usually understood. He was a guest, a student, and unexpectedly a teacher, all because of Lyra. She moved with the same careful grace she had on the day of the ritual, yet there was a new confidence in her steps. Her decisions now carried weight, not just because of her status among the priests, but because she had chosen to see something beyond tradition. And Elias saw it too, the glimmer of potential in a culture that had been locked in ritual for generations. Their days began with the study of Xiphorian symbols. Elias could not speak their language yet, but Lyra guided him through their written forms, gestures, and melodies. It was painstaking work, slower than human conversation, but it was deeply rewarding. He discovered that their symbols were not just letters or words. They represented ideas, principles, and even feelings. One symbol could mean harmony, another could mean innovation, and some symbols seemed to carry multiple layers of meaning, like stories compressed into a single shape. Elias found himself fascinated. Human writing was linear, practical, and direct. The Xiphorian method was abstract, artistic, and poetic. Yet in it, he saw a remarkable logic. Their minds were trained to perceive patterns, connections, and consequences far beyond what a human could instinctively understand. It made him realize that the ritual, the altar, and all the ceremonial practices had evolved not out of cruelty, but out of a desire to maintain balance and order. Lyra did not merely teach him, she challenged him. "Humans solve problems with force," she said one day, her voice soft but pointed. "You change what exists by breaking it." "Why?" Elias considered the question. He realized she was not accusing him, only observing. Humans often defaulted to action, to confrontation, to direct interference. But here, in this society, subtlety mattered. "We think quickly," he replied slowly. "We act fast because sometimes waiting costs lives, but I think maybe we don't always notice the smaller solutions." Lyra's eyes glimmered. "Perhaps that is why you survive. You see things differently." It was the first time she had called him a survivor rather than a captive. The word resonated within him. He had survived countless missions, alien worlds, and harsh environments, yet he had never felt this kind of survival, one not of strength, but of connection and understanding. They began working on small projects together. The temple had problems of its own, inefficiencies unnoticed for centuries. The flow of energy through the chambers, the alignment of symbols, the timing of rituals, all could be optimized without destroying their meaning. Elias suggested changes, small adjustments inspired by human engineering, human reasoning. Lyra translated them into Xiphorian practice, careful to preserve tradition while allowing innovation. At first, the other priests were cautious. They observed from afar, whispering to one another in the subtle language of gestures and light patterns. Some looked skeptical, some worried, but none acted. Change in their society was not violent. It was gradual, measured, deliberate. Even dissent was expressed through observation rather than argument. One morning, Elias and Lyra were working near a pool of liquid crystal that reflected the light of the sky. He had been experimenting with directing the energy flow from one chamber to another, using a small device Lyra had given him. It hummed softly, pulsing with color. The movement of energy was subtle, like the circulation of air in a room, yet he could see the difference immediately. Lyra watched, her eyes reflecting the shimmering pool. "You are thinking in ways we have never tried," she said. "You are human." Elias smiled. "I'm learning from you too. I've never seen a system so alive. Every part affects the whole more than we usually notice." Their work grew bolder. They designed a system where rituals could proceed without harming anyone, where energy flows could be redirected, where the symbolic meanings of tradition were preserved, yet the old limitations could be removed. It was slow, careful work, but Elias felt a thrill he had not felt since leaving Earth. This was creation, not destruction. The turning point came when one of the senior priests approached them. He was tall, his skin shifting a deep blue and his eyes glowed with suspicion. Elias froze slightly, unsure if his presence would be tolerated. Lyra stepped forward, her hand on his shoulder, a protective gesture. The priest observed their work silently, then made a series of intricate gestures. Elias could not understand the words, but Lyra explained softly, "He wants to know if your ideas respect the old ways. If not, he will report us." Elias nodded. He understood now that respect was as important as ingenuity. He gestured toward the device, showing how it preserved the alignment of symbols, the flow of energy, and the sacred timing of rituals. Lyra translated his gestures, her expressions precise yet filled with care. The senior priest paused, then, to Elia's surprise, inclined his head slightly. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it marked a moment of acceptance. The seed of change had taken root. Weeks turned into months. The temple thrived in subtle ways. The energy flowed more efficiently, the rituals were smoother, and the priests themselves began to notice the human influence. Elias and Lyra continued to explore, experimenting with combinations of human logic and Xiphorian philosophy. They discussed ethics, creativity, and balance. They discovered ways to incorporate human storytelling into Xiphorian ceremonies, allowing narrative to enhance meaning without disrupting sacred order. During these months, Elias learned more about Lyra than any human had known about an alien being. She was curious, intelligent, and brave, not in the sense of physical courage, but in the way she challenged assumptions and sought understanding. She loved music, though not human music. Her melodies were built of vibrations and colors, resonating in the mind rather than the ear. She enjoyed observing the patterns of life in small creatures that lived within the temple gardens. And she laughed softly, but genuinely, at moments when Elias made mistakes translating human concepts into her symbolic gestures. Elias realized he was falling into a rhythm of life he had never known. He was no longer just a visitor or a captive. He was part of something larger. And yet there was still a tension, a quiet urgency that hovered in the background. The Xiphorian society had traditions for a reason. Not all would accept change. Not all would see humans as partners. One evening, as the sky dimmed in slow waves of light, Elias and Lyra stood together at the edge of a terrace overlooking the central city of the Xiphorians. The architecture was organic, flowing, alive, yet it had structure, purpose, and harmony. Elias felt awe, not fear, at the complexity of it. "You've done more than I expected," Lyra said. "Humans have a persistence we admire, even if it is sometimes reckless." Elias chuckled. "Persistence, maybe, or maybe stubbornness." She tilted her head, studying him. "There is a difference between force and persistence. Humans often confuse them, but you persist without breaking. That is rare." He felt warmth at her words. For the first time, he realized that Lyra's respect was not just a personal favor. It was recognition of humanity itself, the qualities that made them capable of survival, creativity, and hope in the face of uncertainty. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft, rhythmic sound. Elias looked toward the central chamber, where a new ritual was beginning. But something was different. The energy, the alignment, the flow of light, it all moved more smoothly, guided by the systems they had designed. The priests executed their gestures flawlessly, and even the senior members seemed to notice a subtle improvement in harmony. It was a quiet victory, not marked by cheers or celebration, but by observation, reflection, and acknowledgement. Elias understood that this was how change worked here: subtle, incremental, respectful. No one was forced, no one was harmed, and yet the effect was profound. As night settled, Elias returned to the quiet chamber with Lyra. They sat side by side, speaking through gestures and the few words they could share. Elias thought about Earth, about the wars, the machines, the constant rush to survive. And he realized that perhaps the greatest strength of humanity was not power or aggression, but the ability to adapt, to learn, and to connect across boundaries. Lyra reached out and touched the glowing device they had been working on together. "You've changed something here," she said. "Not by force, by understanding, by being human." Elias smiled. "And you've changed too. You've seen a different way to protect and guide your people, not by ritual alone, but by learning." They sat in silence for a while, watching the light pulse softly in the chamber. Outside, the city continued its quiet life. Somewhere, other humans might be looking at the stars, wondering if they could ever reach worlds like this. Elias no longer wondered. He had reached it. And he had not conquered it. He had learned from it, respected it, and helped it evolve. That night he realized that the journey was far from over. There were more challenges ahead, more minds to change, more systems to understand. But for the first time he felt not fear, not helplessness, but possibility. Together with Lyra they could explore, learn, and guide. Perhaps one day, humans and Xiphorians could work as equals, building a future that honored both species. As he drifted into a rare, restful sleep, Elias thought of the altar, the ritual, and the choices that had brought him here. It was not the end of his story. It was only the beginning. And in that beginning he found hope, curiosity, and a sense of purpose he had never known before. The stars outside did not blink or move. They remained distant, eternal, and silent. Yet inside, a small world had begun to hum with life, with possibility, and with the quiet triumph of understanding. Elias Kane was no longer a human on an alien altar. He was a teacher, a learner, and a bridge between two worlds, and for the first time he felt that anything could be possible. The morning light on the Xiphorian world shifted slowly, painting the city with golden hues that reflected off the crystalline structures. Captain Elias Kane stood beside Lyra on a high terrace overlooking the central plaza. Today was not a day of ceremony, but a day of demonstration. After months of quiet work, subtle adjustments, and careful planning, they were finally ready to show the Xiphorian Council and the other priests the fruits of their combined efforts. Elias could feel a tension in the air, subtle but real. The Xiphorians moved gracefully through the plaza below, their eyes bright with curiosity and skepticism. Some whispered to one another, communicating through gestures and melodic tones that Elias had learned to interpret only in part. Change was not taken lightly here, and he knew that even a small mistake could jeopardize everything they had worked toward. Lyra turned to him, her golden eyes steady and confident. "Remember," she said, "we do not impose, we offer understanding. That is enough." Elias nodded. He understood. They were not here to force change or prove superiority. They were here to demonstrate a new way, one that respected Xiphorian tradition while incorporating human ingenuity. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also a thrill he had not experienced since the day he first stepped onto this world. They entered the central chamber together. It was a vast, open space filled with glowing symbols that pulsed in harmony with the energy flowing through the city. The altar stood at the center, though it no longer held the same ominous presence it had on the day of his capture. The device they had built together rested on a pedestal nearby, glowing softly with the balance of energy they had calibrated over months of experimentation. The council arrived shortly after, a group of tall Xiphorians whose skin shimmered with deep blues, greens, and purples. Their eyes, glowing faintly, turned toward Elias with cautious attention. Lyra stood beside him, her posture calm but commanding. She had chosen to support him openly, to show that his presence and ideas were to be taken seriously. Elias took a deep breath. He began by gesturing toward the device, moving slowly and deliberately. Lyra translated his gestures into the flowing symbols and sounds of Xiphorian language. The message was simple. This device preserved the sacred rituals, maintained the energy flows, and allowed the ceremonies to continue without the need for traditional offerings that limited the city's potential. At first, the council members were silent. Their eyes shifted, observing the light patterns and the harmony in the room. Some flickered with curiosity, others with doubt. Elias felt a momentary twinge of fear, the old human instinct to anticipate conflict. But he reminded himself, this was not about confrontation. This was about clarity and understanding. Lyra activated the device. The energy in the chamber began to hum softly, a sound that resonated in the mind rather than the ear. The symbols on the walls brightened, realigning themselves according to the improved system. The flow of energy was visible now, like streams of colored light moving in perfect synchronization. The council watched, their attention fixed, as the old limitations of the ritual dissolved into a display of harmony and precision. One of the senior priests stepped forward, his deep blue skin shimmering as he extended a hand in a gesture of inquiry. Elias followed, demonstrating the function of the device through simple motions. Lyra translated every movement, every explanation into the language of symbols and melody. Slowly, the council members began to nod, their expressions shifting from skepticism to intrigue. "This is unexpected," the senior priest said, his voice resonant but careful. The words were simple, yet their meaning carried profound weight. The ritual is preserved, the energy is enhanced, and no lives are limited. Elias realized the truth of his own thoughts in that moment. This was more than approval, it was recognition. Not just of his skills, but of humanity itself. Humans could adapt, learn, and collaborate without destroying the traditions of another culture. This was the essence of understanding, the bridge between worlds. Lyra spoke next, her melodic tone clear and firm. She explained how the ideas had been developed together, emphasizing the cooperation between human creativity and Xiphorian philosophy. She described the months of observation, experimentation, and patient adjustment. She did not present Elias as a savior, nor herself as a rebel. They were partners, equals in thought and action. The council murmured among themselves, their voices a soft harmony that Elias had come to understand. Some expressed excitement, some concern, but all were engaged. He realized that this moment was not about immediate acceptance, but about planting the seeds of transformation. Change in Xiphorian society was like this, subtle, careful, deliberate, but once the first roots took hold, it could flourish. Elias gestured toward the altar. "This platform," he said, moving slowly, "can continue to be sacred. It can still honor your traditions, but it no longer needs to limit life or opportunity. It can be a symbol of balance and growth." The words were simple, but Lyra translated them with precision and care. The council's expressions softened. The energy in the chamber seemed to respond, pulsing in brighter harmony. Elias felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was not victory in the human sense. There was no battle, no conquest, but it was a triumph of understanding, creativity, and collaboration. One of the younger priests stepped forward next, curiosity shining in her eyes. She gestured toward the device, then to the altar. Lyra interpreted. Could humans and Zyphorians work together more often? Could knowledge be shared? Elias smiled. He realized this question went beyond their immediate experiment. It was a sign that their ideas were spreading, that change could be nurtured across generations. He nodded and Lyra conveyed his answer. Yes, together we can learn from each other. Together we can explore and grow. The chamber filled with a quiet energy, a resonance that Elias had never felt before. It was the hum of understanding, the pulse of a society beginning to embrace new possibilities without abandoning its identity. He looked at Lyra, and she met his gaze with a calm confidence. They had done more than improve a ritual. They had opened the door to a future where humans and Zyphorians could work as partners, equals, and friends. Outside, the city moved in quiet harmony. The flowing architecture, the luminous walkways, and the gardens reflected the changes within. Energy systems hummed efficiently, symbols aligned perfectly, and even the citizens moved with a subtle ease that suggested progress. Elias realized that this was only the beginning. The work would continue, but the foundation was set. Later, Elias walked with Lyra through the temple gardens. The air was filled with the soft hum of life, and the colors of the plants seemed brighter, more vibrant. Birds, if they could be called that, sang in harmonies that resonated with the energy of the planet. Elias paused to observe the intricate patterns of the flora and fauna, marveling at the interconnectedness of it all. "You've changed something here," Lyra said softly. "Not by force, by understanding," Elias nodded. "And you've changed too. You've opened the minds of your people, shown them that growth does not require loss and that learning from others can be a strength." They walked in silence for a while, absorbing the beauty of the world around them. Elias thought about Earth, about the wars and struggles humans faced, and realized that what made humans extraordinary was not only their resilience but their curiosity and ability to connect. Lyra had taught him as much about patience and wisdom as he had taught her about creativity and innovation. The weeks that followed were filled with collaboration. Young priests approached Elias and Lyra with questions, eager to learn about human approaches to problem solving. Older priests, once skeptical, began to consult them on energy alignment and ritual improvements. The city itself seemed to thrive, as if responding to the harmony created by cooperation rather than hierarchy. Elias began to feel a deep sense of belonging. He was no longer an outsider on an alien world. He was a participant, a teacher, and a friend. The fear and uncertainty of his capture had faded, replaced by purpose and fulfillment. And Lyra, ever patient, ever curious, remained his guide and equal partner in this journey. One evening, as the light dimmed in gentle waves, Elias and Lyra stood once more on the terrace overlooking the city. The stars above shone brightly, distant but inspiring. Elias reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from captive on the altar to collaborator and innovator. The transformation was not just in the city or its people, it was within him as well. "I never imagined this," Elias said quietly. "I thought I would only survive. I didn't know I could make a difference." Lyra smiled, her golden eyes reflecting the glow of the city below. "Sometimes we do not know what we are capable of until we try. You have shown courage not in battle but in understanding and patience. That is a strength your people possess in abundance." Elias felt warmth in his chest. He realized that heroism was not always about defeating an enemy or conquering a world. It could also be about learning, listening, teaching, and building connections. He had survived, yes, but more importantly, he had grown, and helped others grow in the process. As they stood together, the city humming with life and potential, Elias knew that this was only the beginning. There were more worlds to explore, more cultures to understand, and more opportunities to connect. Humans had a place here, not as conquerors but as partners. And the Zyphorians had shown that tradition and innovation could coexist, guided by curiosity, respect, and courage. The stars above remained eternal and silent, But on this small world, light and understanding shone brightly. Elias Cain, once a human warrior on the altar, had become something more, a bridge between worlds, a symbol of cooperation, and a living testament to the power of empathy, ingenuity, and hope. He turned to Lyra and she met his gaze. No words were needed. Together they had changed a world. Together they would continue to learn, explore, and grow. And in that quiet, steady light, Elias knew that humanity had proven its worth not through strength or force, but through the courage to understand, adapt, and build a better future. The stars outside waited silently, indifferent yet eternal. Inside, a world once bound by ritual and limitation now pulsed with possibility. And Elias Cain, human warrior turned teacher and partner, was at the center of it all, ready to step forward into the limitless horizon of what could be.